Welcome to another edition of Talk City Greensboro, produced by GTN, featuring interviews and events happening around town. It's an easy way to stay in the know while you're on the go. Subscribe to Talk City on iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or SoundCloud so you can keep up with what's going on in Greensboro city government. I'm your host, Josh Johnson, and joining me in the studio at the controls, the man in charge, Mr. Devin Smith.
Thank you, Josh, for that intro. How you doing?
I'm putting a little bit more direction, a little bit more inflection there.
Yeah, I love the enthusiasm.
Right. It's the same thing. It's just a measure of enthusiasm from one podcast to the other.
Well, what's up, Greensboro? Thank you for joining us for another edition of Talk City. This week, we are talking about public safety in Greensboro. Basically, since the start of 2020, the job of police officers, firefighters, and Guilford Metro 911 have changed drastically due to COVID-19 and trying to keep not only the residents of Greensboro safe, but also city personnel, and keeping everyone in good health has been a point of emphasis. So we've got the best man for all the best updates here in the studio with us, Assistant City Manager Trey Davis. How you doing?
Good. I'm glad to be back. Thank you, Devin, Josh. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Glad to be back here. Last time I was here, we had fun. This time, things have changed a little bit, not only locally, but across the country and across the world. But thank you for having me and giving me a moment this morning, because our public safety has definitely had a number of challenges, but I'm excited, to be honest with you. I'm excited, very proud of what our public safety has done. They've stepped up to the plate in a number of different ways I want to talk about today. So I'm just glad to be here.
Oh, thank you.
Yep.
Well, the job of our public safety departments is to go out and be in the community. That's their number one goal, is to give service, right? So what have we done to try to prevent the spread of COVID-19 to our personnel working in the community every day?
So there are a number of things that we've done with just personnel and trying to limit interactions. Back when things began to really rise, when we knew it was a pandemic, but when you really saw, how quickly this thing could spread, how, it began to grow in our community. I think I remember tracking the data, tracking the numbers in the early April. And then we look in the middle to the end of May toward June, we're really in a tough spot. So our police chief and our fire chief implemented some simple measures, not necessarily policies, but their practices. Like, for example, police officers try not to go inside of a residence unless they have to. Our police officers and our firefighters, we've had a number of concerns from community members, but they try to wear their mask when reasonable. I know people say, well, you got to wear a mask in the city, but you do have to understand that, when public safety officials are completing their task, sometimes it might not be practical that they do wear the mask. But I will say this, we try to make sure that we do wear masks, wear protective equipment to ensure that we don't spread to anyone else. There are also some internal things that we're doing to make sure that the police officers are safe and not going back into the community if they've had potential exposure. So we've got some exposure measures that we put in place for our public safety, our first responders, and we've got plans in place to kind of reduce our approach to services. But I will say this, we continue to have full services. So our police officers are responding to calls, our firefighters, also with our GM 911 staff. They are, while they aren't out in the public, they do have to come into a workspace. They don't have the option of working from home. They have to come to work. But they have been phenomenal. And I'll say this, they've really stepped up to the plate to handle the volume of calls. We've gone through different levels of people wanting to report that I saw a group of people having a cookout and they had more than 10 people.
Right.
Yeah, if you don't think people are not listening to the governor, you're wrong. They know the numbers. We've had people complaining about establishments. And so our 911 staff have been phenomenal about being able to drive those things in the right direction, being able to dispatch our officers. But I'm just really proud of that whole group.
And those calls, I'm sure, the regular interaction calls, whether someone wants to needs help for health, or I know those calls probably sound a lot different now, given what's going on.
They do, but at the same time, people are just concerned.
Yeah.
But I will say this: what we try to do with each component of the governor's executive orders, there are expectations that local law enforcement will try to gain compliance or enforce those. And so, what we have been committed and dedicated to is seeking compliance first, trying to educate people regarding the right way to operate, be safe, or to be in the community. We've been fortunate to this point that we've not had to get to a place that we charge people with violations. We have most recently in the last couple of weeks had to close down some night establishments. But I want to take the liberty for just a minute to give this personal plea. I look at those numbers every day, and I send groups out, send the numbers and the data to groups. Those numbers continue to rise. Sometimes we have this siloed effect in our communities, and we feel like, okay, it's going on in Myrtle Beach, it's going on in New York, it's going on in Florida, but we're fine here. I see people walking around, so it must be fine. But realistically, if we're ever going to get back to some level of normalcy or some level of comfortability in our community, then we're going to have to really, really, really pay attention to what we do. And I think the problem is people are taking advantage of how far they can go, just what they can do, and they are kind of ignoring that we're still in the middle of something that really can impact our community in a very serious way.
Yeah. Well, I mean, with public service, it almost seems like you have to be ready at some point for, an officer or a firefighter to test positive. So you said earlier, you guys are still providing a complete level of service. So, but I'm sure that has changed in some way. I mean, I'm sure that there are new protocols in place. So how is the pandemic affecting the services that we provide? I mean, obviously you're still giving all the services, but I mean, how has that offering that service changed?
So I'll give two examples. What we've done in both, I'll give the example from our police and fire departments. Anytime, and for years, because of the structure and the infrastructure of how they operate, they have to have plans for the worst. And so what we've done in each, for example, like our police department, if it comes to a place that our resources are being taxed to such a degree, we'll look at those resources that aren't everyday resources. And I'll say this, the most important component within our police department is our patrol response to the community. And so we make sure that if there are specialized units that don't have direct services to our community every day, then we will repurpose those areas so that they can ensure that we have proper service every day. Same with our fire department. The fire department has an algorithm in place by where if there is an outbreak to the point that it reduces staffing, then they can collapse their operations in a manner that they'll be able to still respond to calls in every area of the city.
Right. So the plans are in place.
Plans are always in place.
Always in place. That's good.
So this pandemic hit us out of nowhere, but then on top of that, you pile on heightened sense of racial tension, and police brutality has definitely been right in the center of that conversation. However, how has that affected the interaction and the relationship between the community and the people who protect it? Because it's not only a police thing, but like you said, that's a fire thing. It's a public safety thing. When people call to Guilford Metro 911, how is their attitude? How well are they able to give information? All these things kind of changed in the way that we kind of did things in the community because of what has been going on the last couple months.
I got so many thoughts around that, but I'll say this. I remember a couple of years ago when the New York Times article came out, and it was a little bit on the lower scale. It didn't impact the whole country, obviously. It was an article directly correlated to police vehicle stops here in Greensboro. That, for me, was one of the best moments of Greensboro because it caused us to have a real serious look or taking a real serious inspection into what we do and how what we do and how the way we operate impacts our community. And so when we did that, there were a number of things that we did, a number of changes that we made. We went out and had some conversations with the community, irregardless of what people think from the outside perspective. That was a very good time for us as a police department And I think this is going to be, when we look back 5 years from now, this is going to be a tremendous time for the change that people are looking for in police across the country, across the world. I think what we've been able to do here, our chief of police, I know, you all have talked to him before. He's been phenomenal. He jumped right to some change, and I'll go ahead and put him out there that he's had some great conversations with people, and not just easy conversations. He's had some hard conversations, but this is the time to have the hard conversations that people haven't had before. He's doing that. He and I are talking about policy changes that we've never talked about before. But I think the real thing that I want people to see in that is we're talking about policy change that's going to change how it's going to really address the things that people are asking for. Not necessarily that we're just going to completely change our operations, that we want to address crime, but this is the time that police administration has to look at what we're doing to ensure that what we're doing is adequate and equitable and fair and unbiased to our community. I want to say another thing that I'm very proud of. While we're talking about policy change and while we're talking about looking at those things, I don't want to get lost on the fact that our police department has been tremendous through this. I had some conversation with people in that, we had a number of protests. Our police department has been committed to allowing peaceful protests. Our police department has been committed to working and coordinating efforts with organizers. We've actually been able to form some relationships and some contacts with our organizers to allow them to demonstrate, which I think is very important.
Yeah, absolutely.
In doing that, I think that's the beginning of forming relationships. And we might not see it immediately, but I think that's the beginning of some of the trust that we need to have between our police and the community, which is the reason why we see a number of things that we're seeing now.
Yeah, definitely. It's weird because I'm from a different part of North Carolina, and I won't mention where that is. They just happen to have a Slade Trade House in the middle of downtown. But when I think about what was going on there, people ask me like, well, what was going on in Greensboro? And I was like, well, I mean, I've heard some protests, but it's been, majority peaceful. And I think this was like the Saturday as soon as all the protests were going on. And I was like, yeah, I heard they've been protesting, but everything's been really peaceful. I was like, Greensboro police, they're okay with people protesting as long as, you remain peaceful. Yep. You go through some of the proper channels. You have some connects. You make sure that nobody's doing anything that they're not supposed to do. Right. Unlike some other places that we've seen that's been a little difficult because a lot more things have been happening as far as looting and rioting and stuff like that. So I would say that our relationships seem to be a lot better when it comes to doing some things like that.
Well, I think not only the relationships, Devin, but I think the approach from our command level to recognize the reason that people are protesting. I think when you have a healthy respect for the reason that things are happening, and look, nobody will ever contest the reality of the horrific murder of George Floyd. I want to call it what it is. And so when you see something like that, you have to respect the cry of people who are hurting, who people who are bothered, and people who won't change to prevent things like that from happening.
Yeah. And it was great to see that even that weekend, GPD was like, we're here to support the protest. We're here to let them say what they need to say. So it was... It was a great step.
Yeah.
How's everybody doing? I mean, that's a question that everybody's asking each other nowadays, and there just is no simple answer. But overall, what's the morale like with GPD, with fire, with GM9, Metro 911?
I've got a number of friends in all of those areas, and if I got on here and said everything's fine, they probably would call me.
I'm not sure I'd believe you.
Yeah. I will say they're tired and taxed.
Sure.
They've been, working hard, but they still have great resolve within them to continue to provide a service, which is amazing to me.
Yeah.
And our leaders in all of those areas continue to lead very well. and continue to encourage their people. And I'll say this, I'll give a plea to people that you recognize and observe what your local people are doing and how your local people treat you. And any place and every place has room for change or room for improvement. But I think we have great staff here in every one of those areas: our public safety, our first responders, and I want people locally here to know it, and I want people to hear it. The other thing I want to take a moment. I know it wasn't on our sheet, but our police officers are committed and dedicated. On top of the pandemic, on top of the movement across the country. Now we're in a wave of homicides like we've never seen. Yeah. Before I got into this job, at one point I was the commander of our criminal investigations, and we're almost at 30 homicides. 30 homicides was almost the year total, and so to be at that place in July and to see the amount of young people who are losing their lives in this violent wave is very challenging. And I think we have to, as a community as a whole, step up. We have to, there's some things that we've got to put down to come together, because ultimately, people want to get through this pandemic. People want policy change. I want them too. Those things are great. But in the meantime, we cannot turn a blind eye to young people losing their lives. I think the chief made some statements on the other day, which were, spot on regarding how we need to see what's happening in our community.
Definitely. Yeah. It's about time that we hold each other accountable, and I don't mean that from like a city to residents or residents to city, but just as brothers and sisters of this community, it's about time that we start looking at each other and expecting the right things from each other. Right. So definitely. Well, thank you for coming and sharing all that good information with us. I appreciate it.
All right.
Good to see you. Take care.
Thank you.
Stay tuned in weekly by subscribing to Talk City Greensboro on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play. And don't forget, you can download Talk City from SoundCloud.
That's it for this week. Thank you for tuning in to Talk City. Be sure to watch GTN, your official source for news and information from the city of Greensboro. GTN is available on Spectrum Channel 13,
AT&T UVerse Channel 99,
North State Channel 31.
GTN also streams live and now on Roku and the city's website
at greensboro-nc.gov. Have a good one.
Take care.